Yandy and Mendeecees have done it again, but this time, the love and hip-hop world is left reeling in disbelief. What began as a routine family dinner quickly spiraled into an explosive confrontation that no one saw coming. The Frost family, long admired for their polished public image and tight-knit appearances, suddenly found themselves at the center of shocking revelations that threatened to tear the family apart. Fans are shocked, whispers are spreading like wildfire across social media, and every member of the cast is scrambling to process the chaos. The night started innocently enough, with Yandy and Mendeecees arriving to celebrate what was supposed to be a joyful milestone. But behind closed doors, simmering tensions that had been buried for years erupted with alarming speed. Heated words were exchanged, accusations flew across the room, and a secret one that some say could change the course of the Frost family legacy was unveiled. Sources close to the family report that emotions ran high, with tears, shouting, and moments of stunned silence punctuating the night's unfolding drama. At the center of it all were questions no one expected to hear, betrayals from within the family, long-held grudges resurfacing, and alliances breaking apart in real time. The Frosts, often seen as untouchable in the public eye, suddenly appeared vulnerable, their carefully curated image cracked in front of an audience that could not look away. Friends and extended family watched in disbelief, unsure how to intervene as Yandy and Mendeecees pressed for truth, determined to expose what had been kept in the shadows for far too long. Fans online are divided, some taking sides, others questioning the very fabric of the family dynamic they once admired. One moment, there is laughter masking tension. The next, silence heavy with the weight of revelations no one was ready for. The air was thick with suspense, and every interaction seemed loaded with meaning. The Frost family was left divided, and love and hip-hop fans everywhere are desperate to know what exactly happened that night, and how will it change the family forever. You won't want to miss a single moment of this shocking, jaw-dropping, tear-inducing episode as Yandy and Mendeecees pull back the curtain and reveal the secrets the Frost family hoped would never see the light of day. The tension was palpable the moment Yandy and Mendeecees stepped through the Frost family's ornate front doors, their expressions calm but eyes sharp, betraying the storm they carried inside. What was supposed to be a casual family gathering quickly morphed into a battlefield of emotions, long-suppressed grievances, and unspoken truths. As they entered the grand living room, every eye turned, and a hush fell over the assembled family members. Emotions ran high instantly, whispers filled the air, punctuated by sharp glances and the nervous shuffling of feet. Yandy's presence, confident and unyielding, seemed to command the room, while Mendeecees' measured, calm demeanor suggested that he had a purpose far beyond casual conversation. "We need to talk," Yandy said, her voice steady but carrying an edge that immediately set the room on alert. The statement was simple, but it carried weight, a weight that everyone in the room instantly recognized. The Frosts, known for their composure, found themselves caught off guard, the mask of harmony cracking with each passing second. The opening salvo came from what seemed like a trivial comment, yet it triggered an avalanche of suppressed emotions. One family member muttered a remark about loyalty. Another questioned past decisions that had been swept under the rug for years. It started as small, pointed observations but quickly escalated into accusations. Yandy leaned in, her eyes blazing, her tone measured but firm. "It's time we stop pretending everything's okay when it's not," she declared. Mendeecees stood beside her, his posture unwavering, adding, "We've all known the truth, but some have chosen silence over honesty, and that ends tonight." The room seemed to constrict with tension. Every family member's heartbeat was almost audible, each pulse echoing the unspoken dread that had been simmering beneath the surface for years. As the discussion grew more heated, the cracks in the Frost family's polished exterior became glaringly obvious. Long-held grudges surfaced. Siblings began questioning each other's motives. Parents found themselves caught between defending their children and acknowledging uncomfortable truths. Voices rose, tears were shed, and moments of stunned silence punctuated the conversation. Mendeecees revealed details that no one expected to hear. Secrets that some family members had thought would remain buried forever. "You can't keep covering for mistakes that harm everyone," he said, each word deliberate, heavy with judgment and care. Yandy added, "This isn't about blame. It's about facing reality before it destroys what's left of your family." The words hung in the air like a challenge, daring the Frosts to confront what they had avoided for decades. Arguments erupted over trivial and major issues alike. One member accused another of betrayal, citing actions that had been misconstrued or hidden entirely. Another pointed out inconsistencies in past decisions, questioning motives that had always been assumed innocent. As the emotions escalated, Yandy and Mendeecees skillfully navigated the storm, probing, questioning, and exposing layers of deceit that had been expertly concealed. Why was this never addressed before? Yandy pressed, her gaze unwavering. Because we were afraid, one sibling admitted, voice quivering, eyes downcast. Afraid of what might happen if we spoke up, another chimed in. The confessions began to unravel the family's foundation, forcing every member to confront the parts of themselves and each other they had avoided for so long. Meanwhile, reactions from the surrounding friends and onlookers added another layer of chaos. Some were visibly shocked, whispering among themselves and exchanging uneasy glances. Others tried to mediate, attempting to calm the rising tide of tension. But even the most composed observers found themselves caught in the whirlwind. Social media, as expected, began to buzz as insiders leaked snippets of the confrontation. Fans of Love and Hip Hop were captivated, shocked by the intensity and raw emotion displayed. And speculation ran rampant about what had triggered such an explosive revelation. Every movement, every word, every glare was dissected and analyzed, fueling the frenzy and leaving the family even more exposed. The revelations were relentless. Yandy brought forward instances of long-standing manipulations that had gone unnoticed, while Mendeecees confronted the family with truths that directly challenged their perception of loyalty and trust. One of the most shocking moments occurred when a deeply personal secret, one involving financial deceit and personal betrayals, was laid bare in front of everyone. Gasps filled the room, some members recoiling in disbelief, others visibly shaken, unable to reconcile the image of their family they had always held with the painful reality now presented. We can't move forward if we keep hiding behind lies, Mendeecees asserted, voice calm but firm, refusing to allow denial to dominate the room. Tears flowed freely as memories, accusations, and confessions collided, leaving no one untouched. Yandy's relentless pursuit of truth acted like a magnifying glass, exposing every flaw, every hesitation, every concealed emotion. The Frost family, once admired for their unity and composure, now faced a mirror reflecting vulnerability, fear, and unresolved tension. Friends tried to intervene, offering comfort or trying to shift the conversation toward lighter topics. But the intensity of the confrontation made distraction impossible. Each revelation seemed to amplify the next, creating a chain reaction of emotions that could not be contained. The night's drama peaked when a long-standing family rift, previously thought resolved, reignited with full force. Words were exchanged that cut deeper than anyone expected, and old alliances fractured under the pressure of newly uncovered truths. Yandy and Mendeecees remained unflinching, guiding the conversation with precision, exposing each contradiction and challenging every denial. It's not just about what happened, Yandy emphasized, her tone unwavering. It's about understanding how we let this happen and who we are if we continue to ignore it. The room seemed to tremble under the weight of her words, each family member forced to grapple with the implications of decades of unspoken conflict. By the time the night drew to a close, the Frost family was left divided, exhausted, and shaken to their core. Some sought reconciliation, attempting to find common ground amidst the wreckage of secrets and confrontations. Others retreated, overwhelmed by the magnitude of what had been revealed. Yandy and Mendeecees, having achieved the unthinkable, left the family with a mix of relief, confusion, and an urgent sense that nothing would ever be the same again. Fans watching from afar were left in awe, astonished at the courage it took to expose such deeply buried truths and captivated by the very emotional roller coaster that unfolded behind closed doors. Even as the night ended, the tension lingered, a haunting reminder that the Frost family's story was far from over. Every member would carry the weight of that evening forward, their relationships permanently altered, their trust forever tested. And for the Love and Hip Hop audience, the revelations were just the beginning, a tantalizing glimpse into the drama, betrayal, and raw emotion that continues to define the world of the Frost. Family questions remained. How would the family heal? Could old wounds ever be mended? And who, if anyone, would emerge stronger from the chaos that Yandy and Mendeecees had so boldly unleashed? The answers, it seemed, were still shrouded in suspense, waiting to be discovered as the story of the Frost family continued to unfold. The morning after the explosive confrontation, the Frost household was anything but peaceful. The echoes of last night's revelations still reverberated through the rooms, leaving everyone on edge. Yandy and Mendeecees had departed, but the impact of their words lingered, creating a tense atmosphere thick with unspoken questions and simmering emotions. Siblings avoided eye contact, parents retreated into quiet contemplation, and even the family pets seemed unsettled, sensing the charged energy in the air. Rumors of the prior night's events had already begun circulating. And before anyone could fully process what had happened, messages, calls, and social media alerts bombarded the family. Friends and extended relatives called in shock, their reactions ranging from disbelief to outrage, each inquiry only adding to the mounting pressure. The day unfolded with awkward silences and forced conversations. One member, trying to downplay the events, suggested returning to normalcy. But the suggestion was met with visible resistance. Normal? Another retorted sharply, her voice quivering with emotion. How can we pretend after everything that was said last night? It became quickly apparent that the Frost family's veneer of unity had been shattered. Each individual wrestled with their own feelings of betrayal, confusion, and hurt. And attempts at reconciliation seemed futile against the backdrop of truths now fully exposed. Mendeecees and Yandy's probing questions had dug deep, uncovering layers of resentment and secrets that could no longer remain hidden. The siblings who had been previously aligned suddenly found themselves questioning each other's intentions. Accusations flew like daggers, both past and present grievances resurfacing in the heated exchanges. One member confronted another about a financial misstep, pointing out inconsistencies that had been conveniently ignored for years. Tears were shed, voices raised, and apologies were offered and rejected in quick succession. Why didn't anyone say anything sooner? One sibling demanded, voice cracking under the weight of frustration. Another countered defensively, we were trying to protect the family. Yet protection, they realized, had only allowed the festering wounds to grow, leaving the family more vulnerable than ever. Meanwhile, friends and family on the outside tried to mediate, but their efforts often backfired. The intensity of the emotions made it nearly impossible to intervene effectively. Every attempt at calm conversation seemed to ignite further tension. A cousin, trying to offer a comforting perspective, was met with sharp retorts and tears, leaving them shaken and retreating with a mix of confusion and sympathy. Even the usually level-headed parents struggled to maintain control, their attempts at diplomacy frequently interrupted by outbursts and pointed accusations. The household was a whirlwind of confrontation, as each individual tried to navigate their own emotional responses while facing the undeniable truth laid bare by Yandy and Mendeecees. As the day progressed, attention shifted to the more deeply personal revelations. Yandy had unearthed instances of hidden alliances and secret communications that had long gone unnoticed. These disclosures sent shockwaves through the family, with members questioning loyalties and past decisions. A heated debate erupted over a decision made years prior that had affected multiple family members. And emotions ran high as old grievances resurfaced. We can't keep pretending like that never happened, one sibling shouted, pacing the room in frustration. Another slammed a hand on the table, eyes blazing. It wasn't just a mistake, it was betrayal. The room vibrated with tension, a storm of anger, hurt, and disbelief that no one could ignore. The situation escalated when one member revealed a private conversation that contradicted the family's long-held narratives. This revelation acted as a catalyst, igniting further confrontations and forcing the Frosts to face truths that had been carefully buried. Heated debates over past misdeeds, hidden alliances, and unspoken resentments dominated the day. Each disclosure seemed to layer upon the next, creating a domino effect of emotional intensity. Even those who had attempted to remain neutral found themselves pulled into the whirlwind, their own biases and judgments surfacing in unexpected ways. Friends of the family, watching from afar, expressed disbelief on social media. Fans of love and hip-hop were glued to updates, some supporting Yandy and Mendeecees' pursuit of truth, while others sided with the Frosts, claiming the revelations were exaggerated. The online discourse mirrored the chaos within the household, with arguments spilling over into comment sections and fan forums. The Frost family's private turmoil had become public spectacle, each reaction amplifying the tension within the home. As evening approached, the family convened in what was meant to be a calmer, more reflective setting. However, the intensity of the day made peace nearly impossible. Yandy, sensing the need to bring clarity, suggested a structured conversation, emphasizing honesty over defensiveness. We have to confront this together, she insisted, her voice firm yet compassionate. Mendeecees supported her, adding, it's not about winning or losing, it's about facing reality before it's too late. The proposal sparked mixed reactions. Some embraced the idea, eager for resolution, while others recoiled, unsure if they were ready to confront the emotional storm fully. The dialogue that followed was raw and unfiltered. Members spoke openly about feelings of abandonment, jealousy, and mistrust that had accumulated over the years. Confessions poured out, punctuated by tears and occasional outbursts. Mendeecees and Yandy guided the conversation with skill, drawing out truths while ensuring each person was heard. Every admission seemed to peel back another layer of tension, yet simultaneously revealed new conflicts and unexpected alliances. It became clear that the family's history was far more complicated than anyone had imagined, and navigating the labyrinth of emotions required patience, understanding, and courage. By nightfall, the Frost household remained tense, yet there was a tentative sense of progress. Though the revelations had shaken the family to its core, the structured conversation allowed for a glimpse of reconciliation. Old wounds were acknowledged, and some grudges began to soften under the weight of honesty. Still, the lingering questions of trust, loyalty, and forgiveness left the family in a delicate balance. Aware that the path to healing would be long and uncertain, fans of love and hip-hop were left anticipating the next chapter, captivated by the drama, and hungry for updates on how the Frost family would navigate the emotional minefield laid bare by Yandy and Mendeecees. The night ended with a quiet, uneasy truce. Members retreated to their rooms, minds racing with thoughts, regrets, and reflections on the day's events. Yandy and Mendeecees' influence had left an indelible mark, forcing the family to confront their vulnerabilities and question their relationships in ways they had never done before. While the atmosphere was still heavy with tension, there was a subtle shift to recognition that, perhaps, the first step toward healing had been taken. And though the Frost family's story was far from resolved, one thing was certain: the drama unleashed that day would echo for months to come, leaving fans on the edge of their seats, eagerly awaiting the next revelation, the next confrontation, and the next chapter in a saga defined by secrets, emotions, and unrelenting intensity. The following morning, the Frost household was eerily silent, a stark contrast to the chaos of the previous night. The echoes of arguments, accusations, and confessions seemed to hang in the air, a lingering reminder that the family's unity had been irrevocably shaken. Each member navigated the day in a fragile balance between reflection and unresolved tension, their thoughts consumed by the explosive revelations that Yandy and Mendeecees had forced into the open. The usual routines felt hollow, almost surreal, as the weight of secrets and betrayals settled heavily on everyone's shoulders. The once impeccable image of the Frost family, long admired and envied, was now marred by vulnerability and unspoken anxiety, leaving each member to wrestle with their emotions privately. The atmosphere in the living room was thick with apprehension as the family tentatively gathered for breakfast, the clinking of cutlery filling the uneasy silence. Eyes darted nervously, avoiding direct confrontation, while whispered conversations tried to fill the emotional void. One sibling broke the quiet, their voice hesitant. Do we even know who we are anymore?" The question, simple yet profound, struck a chord with everyone. It was a rare moment of introspection, forcing acknowledgement that the events of the prior night had exposed not just family secrets but fundamental cracks in trust and loyalty. Parents exchanged glances, realizing that their attempts at shielding their children from the harshest truths had only postponed inevitable confrontation. Tension escalated when a previously dormant disagreement resurfaced, triggered by a seemingly innocuous remark about responsibilities and past decisions. One family member accused another of favoritism, citing long-standing patterns of attention and acknowledgement that had fueled resentment. "You always think your way is the only way," the sibling snapped, voice quivering with anger. Another retorted sharply, "And you think I've been blind to all the compromises I've made?" The conversation quickly devolved into a heated exchange, emotions spilling over and rekindling memories of past betrayals and unresolved grievances. It became clear that the prior night had acted as a catalyst, bringing buried conflicts into the light where they could no longer be ignored. Meanwhile, the ripple effects of the confrontation extended beyond the household. Friends, relatives, and close acquaintances reached out, offering support or attempting to mediate, but their involvement often intensified the emotional turmoil. Texts, calls, and social media messages flooded the family, each one a reminder that the private drama had become a spectacle for the outside world. Fans of love and hip-hop were particularly captivated, dissecting every detail and speculating about the family's internal dynamics. Some sided with Yandy and Mendeecees, praising their courage and insistence on truth, while others defended the Frost family, emphasizing the pain and vulnerability exposed by the confrontation. The external pressure compounded the internal tension, leaving the family feeling scrutinized and exposed. As the day progressed, attention turned to the practical implications of the revelations. Financial discrepancies, long ignored disputes over property, and hidden agreements surfaced, each adding another layer of stress and conflict. One sibling confronted another about a secretive decision involving investments. The accusations sharp and accusatory. "You've been hiding this for years," they said, voice rising. "Why now?" The reply, defensive and tense, attempted to justify past choices, but the damage was done. The family's trust, already fragile, suffered further cracks, making reconciliation appear even more daunting. Yandy and Mendeecees' influence was unmistakable, their probing questions and insistence on transparency forcing the Frosts to confront uncomfortable realities that had long been ignored. The emotional intensity reached a new peak when a long-standing personal secret, kept hidden to avoid conflict, was revealed in the presence of all family members. Gasps and shocked murmurs echoed through the room as members grappled with the implications. Conflicting reactions emerged immediately. Some were incredulous, questioning the truth of the claim, while others responded with empathy, acknowledging the courage it took to finally speak out. The tension was palpable, the air thick with anticipation as everyone waited for the fallout. Arguments ensued, and once again, alliances shifted as the true depth of the family's complexities became undeniable. The evening brought a temporary pause in hostilities, a momentary truce where members retreated to their rooms, exhausted from the day's emotional roller coaster. Yet the quiet was uneasy, a fragile veneer over the storm of unresolved issues. Even in solitude, each individual wrestled with memories of accusations, moments of betrayal, and the newfound awareness of vulnerabilities within themselves and others. The confrontation had not only revealed secrets but had also forced introspection, challenging the family's perceptions of loyalty, trust, and personal responsibility. As night deepened, the Frost family began tentative attempts at communication. Small gestures of connection amidst the lingering tension, a quiet conversation in a hallway, a tentative apology over a misinterpreted action, an attempt to understand a sibling's perspective. Each interaction was cautious, fragile, yet marked by a desire to rebuild. Yandy and Mendeecees' role loomed large in the background, their presence absent but influence undeniable. They had not only uncovered truths but had also catalyzed a journey toward accountability and understanding, leaving the Frost family with the daunting task of navigating the aftermath. By the end of the night, the household was a mixture of reflection and anticipation. While wounds were raw and trust remained fragile, there was a subtle acknowledgement that dialogue, though painful, was necessary. The Frost family faced an uncertain future, aware that the path to reconciliation would be neither quick nor easy. Fans of love and hip-hop watched closely, captivated by every development, every interaction, and every subtle shift in the family dynamic. The drama unleashed by Yandy and Mendeecees had irrevocably changed the Frost family, setting the stage for more revelations, confrontations, and emotional reckonings in the days to come. Questions lingered. How would the family rebuild? Could old wounds be healed? And who would emerge stronger, wiser, and more resilient from the turbulence that had been exposed for all to witness? The following day, the Frost household faced a new wave of tension as lingering emotions from the prior confrontations continued to surface. Sleep had been elusive for many, with minds racing over the revelations that Yandy and Mendeecees had brought to light. Even mundane activities felt charged with anticipation and unease. The air seemed heavy, thick with unspoken questions and unresolved conflicts. The family moved cautiously, navigating around one another as though stepping on fragile ground, careful not to provoke the simmering emotions that had yet to settle. Breakfast was silent, each person lost in thought, the clatter of utensils on plates the only audible sound in the still morning. Inevitably, the silence broke, though not gently. A sibling raised a voice, bringing up a decision made years earlier that had long been a source of quiet resentment. "Do you even realize what your choices cost us?" The voice cracked, laced with anger and disbelief. Another retorted defensively, "I did what I thought was best for all of us." The room bristled with tension as old grievances collided with present frustrations. Yandy's words from the previous evening echoed in everyone's mind. The importance of confronting truths no matter how painful, and the need to acknowledge mistakes rather than bury them. Mendeecees.com's insistence on transparency had forced the family to confront realities that had been conveniently ignored, leaving each member emotionally exposed and vulnerable. The day unfolded as a series of emotionally charged interactions. One sibling confronted another over a financial discrepancy, the conversation rapidly escalating into accusations and raised voices. Details that had been obscured or overlooked for years were brought into sharp focus, and the room seemed to pulse with the weight of revelation. "You've been keeping us in the dark for far too long," one accused, tears welling up. The other tried to justify past actions, emphasizing intentions and misunderstandings. But the apology felt hollow against the backdrop of long-held resentment. Each exchange peeled back another layer of tension, revealing fractures in relationships that had long been considered unbreakable. The atmosphere intensified when the family gathered to discuss matters that touched upon personal relationships, trust, and loyalty. Emotions ran high, with confessions mingling with anger, regret, and fear. One sibling admitted to feelings of betrayal that had been festering silently for years, prompting tears and defensive reactions in turn. "I trusted you, and you let me down." The voice trembled, heavy with hurt. Another countered, trying to explain past decisions. But the dialogue often devolved into heated exchanges, emotions overtaking reason. The impact of Yandy and Mendeecees' revelations was undeniable. The Frost family could no longer maintain the facade of harmony, and each member was forced to confront uncomfortable truths about themselves and each other. Friends and outside observers, informed through whispers and social media updates, reacted with shock and fascination. Fans of love and hip-hop debated the ethics, motivations, and potential outcomes of the confrontation. Some praised Yandy and Mendeecees for their courage, emphasizing the necessity of uncovering truths even when it disrupted family harmony. Others sympathized with the Frosts, pointing to the emotional toll of such revelations and questioning whether the timing or method had been appropriate. The online discourse mirrored the chaos within the home, adding pressure and scrutiny that intensified the family's already fraught emotional state. By afternoon, the family attempted a fragile sense of reconciliation, convening in the living room to discuss next steps and possible resolutions. Yandy, in her calm but insistent manner, encouraged each member to speak openly, emphasizing honesty over defensiveness. Mendeecees echoed her sentiment, stressing that understanding and accountability were the only ways to move forward. The conversations were raw and unfiltered, with members articulating long-suppressed grievances, insecurities, and fears. Each disclosure prompted reactions of empathy, surprise, and sometimes anger, creating a dynamic where trust was tentatively rebuilt and yet constantly tested. Tensions escalated again when a previously unaddressed secret regarding family finances came to light. The revelation prompted immediate confrontation, with accusations of mismanagement and favoritism. Voices were raised, tears fell, and even the more composed members struggled to maintain control. Yandy and Mendeecees remained steady, guiding the discussion and pressing for clarity. Their presence felt even in their absence. "We can't move forward without understanding the full truth," Yandy reminded them, her words cutting through the tension with precision. Mendeecees added, "Acknowledging what's been hidden doesn't weaken you, it gives you a chance to rebuild." The evening brought a brief respite as the family retreated to different rooms to process the day's emotional roll. Yet, the tranquility was fragile, overshadowed by anticipation of further revelations and potential confrontations. The Frosts found themselves reflecting deeply on their relationships, past decisions, and the impact of secrecy on trust and loyalty. Each member faced internal reckoning, considering how they would approach reconciliation, repair, and personal growth. Yandy and Mendeecees' influence had irrevocably altered the family dynamic, leaving no room for avoidance or denial. Late into the night, small gestures of connection began to emerge. Siblings reached tentative hands across tables, apologies were whispered, and quiet conversations offered glimpses of understanding. Yet, the fragility of these moments underscored the depth of the family's upheaval. The Frosts recognized that healing would require sustained effort, open communication, and a willingness to confront uncomfortable truths repeatedly. For the fans of love and hip-hop, the drama had only intensified their fascination. The narrative of betrayal, revelation, and emotional reckoning captivated audiences, leaving them eager for the next chapter in a story that had grown far more complex and riveting than anyone could have anticipated. By the end of the day, the Frost household was a mixture of exhaustion, reflection, and cautious optimism. The family had endured an intense series of confrontations and revelations, each member forced to examine their own actions and motivations. Though the path to full reconciliation remained uncertain, there was a sense that progress, however tentative, had been made. Yandy and Mendeecees had succeeded in exposing truths, challenging the family to confront them, and setting the stage for continued emotional growth, dialogue, and understanding. The ripple effects of their intervention would continue to shape the family's interactions, relationships, and public perception, keeping fans engaged and emotionally invested in the unfolding saga. The following morning, the Frost household stirred with a mixture of apprehension and unease. The previous day's revelations had left the family raw, each member navigating the aftermath in their own way. Breakfast was tense. Conversations were punctuated by long pauses and sidelong glances, each person careful with their words, aware of the fragility that now defined the household dynamic. Even the smallest gestures, a passing comment, a shared look, seemed loaded with meaning, carrying the weight of unspoken emotions and unresolved tensions. The memory of Yandy and Mendeecees' probing questions lingered, reminding everyone that avoidance was no longer an option. The first confrontation of the day came unexpectedly. One sibling, unable to contain lingering frustration, confronted another over a past incident involving both trust and loyalty. Voices rose quickly, sharp and accusatory, the emotional intensity escalating within minutes. "Do you even realize the impact of what you did?" one demanded, eyes blazing. The other, defensive but visibly shaken, responded, "I did what I thought was right at the time." The argument was a microcosm of the larger turmoil, a reflection of accumulated grievances that had long been buried under the family's polished public image. Yandy's earlier insistence on confronting the truth seemed prescient. The cracks she had exposed were now widening, leaving no room for pretense or avoidance. Throughout the day, additional conflicts emerged, each revealing new layers of tension. Conversations about financial decisions, personal relationships, and perceived betrayals dominated the household. One member accused another of favoritism, citing long-standing patterns that had caused resentment to fester. Another sibling challenged assumptions about loyalty, questioning motives behind actions previously considered benign. Every discussion seemed to carry multiple undercurrents, a blend of anger, fear, and hurt that made resolution difficult. The presence of unresolved emotions created a volatile atmosphere, where even minor disagreements threatened to escalate into full-blown confrontations. Yandy and Mendeecees' influence, though absent in person, remained palpable. Their prior questioning and insistence on transparency had created a framework in which the Frosts could no longer hide from uncomfortable truths. Members found themselves reflecting on past decisions, reconsidering motives, and acknowledging mistakes that had long been overlooked. Tears, apologies, and defensive reactions intermingled, producing a complex web of emotion that underscored the depth of the family's upheaval. One sibling's tearful confession about a long-held regret triggered both empathy and resentment, sparking further discussion about accountability and understanding. The day's tension spilled into interactions with friends and extended family. Outsiders, aware of the unfolding drama, offered support, mediation, or opinions, often intensifying the emotional climate. Calls, texts, and social media interactions created additional pressure, as fans of love and hip-hop speculated, analyzed, and debated the implications of the Frost family's revelations. Some praised Yandy and Mendeecees for their bravery and insistence on truth, while others defended the family, emphasizing the emotional cost of public scrutiny. The household's internal turbulence was mirrored and magnified externally, amplifying the stakes and making each interaction within the home feel even more consequential. By afternoon, a significant turning point occurred when a long-concealed personal secret came to light. The disclosure ignited immediate debate, emotions surging in waves as members processed the information. Accusations of deception, manipulations, and long-held resentments were voiced with intensity, each revelation building upon the last. The family's trust, already fragile, was tested further, challenging members to navigate the complexities of reconciliation and forgiveness. Yandy and Mendeecees' prior insistence on confronting these truths proved critical. The Frosts had no choice but to face the reality of their fractured relationships. As evening approached, the household attempted a tentative sense of stability. The day's confrontations had exhausted many emotionally, and moments of quiet reflection emerged alongside cautious attempts at connection. Siblings exchanged tentative apologies, parents sought to mediate with measured words, and even those most defensive found themselves considering perspectives they had previously rejected. The atmosphere remained charged, yet there was a subtle acknowledgement that dialogue, however difficult, was necessary for any semblance of healing to occur. Late at night, private conversations offered glimpses of potential reconciliation. Small gestures, a hand on a shoulder, a shared glance, whispered words of understanding provided fragile hope amidst the lingering tension. The family recognized that while the path ahead would be challenging, the revelations initiated by Yandy and Mendeecees had set the stage for meaningful reflection, accountability, and growth. Fans of love and hip-hop, following each development with rapt attention, were captivated by the unfolding drama, invested in both the personal transformations and the ongoing intrigue within the Frost family. By the end of the night, the household had reached a precarious equilibrium. The emotional turbulence of the past days had left deep impressions, yet a sense of cautious progress had emerged. Members understood that rebuilding trust, repairing relationships, and navigating their complex dynamics would require patience, honesty, and resilience. Yandy and Mendeecees had left an indelible mark, challenging the family to confront uncomfortable truths and face the consequences of their actions. The story of the Frost family, exposed in raw and unfiltered detail, continued to captivate fans, leaving questions unanswered and anticipation high for the next chapter in a saga defined by emotion, secrecy, and relentless drama. The tension that had gripped the Frost household showed no signs of dissipating, instead thickening like a storm cloud ready to burst. As each family member wrestled with the consequences of the revelations Yandy and Mendeecees had forced into the open, the weight of exposed secrets pressing down on them in ways that made every interaction a minefield of suspicion, regret, and defensive maneuvering. The air charged with emotions too raw to ignore, and yet too complex to articulate fully, leaving each individual teetering on the edge between confrontation and retreat, a precarious balance that demanded constant vigilance. While the outside world watched avidly through the lens of social media and gossip, fans of love and hip-hop dissecting every nuance, every look, every half-spoken word, feeding a frenzy that seemed to amplify the tension within the home, making every glance and every movement heavier with meaning than it would have been otherwise. And even as the day wore on, no moment passed without an undercurrent of unresolved conflict, every conversation a potential flashpoint, every silence pregnant with suspicion. As siblings and parents alike tried to navigate the treacherous waters of mistrust and emotional exhaustion, the weight of long-buried grievances pressing harder with each passing hour, unspoken accusations simmering just below the surface, threatening to erupt in sudden bursts of anger or sorrow at any misstep. And in this volatile environment, old patterns resurfaced with alarming speed, alliances shifted unpredictably, and loyalties were questioned in ways that left even the most composed family members faltering under the strain. As one sibling recounted a past betrayal in a trembling voice, while another, attempting to defend their actions, found themselves drawn into a verbal volley that exposed even more long-concealed tensions, revealing discrepancies in financial matters, miscommunications that had festered into resentment, and personal choices that had quietly undermined trust over years, each revelation layering upon the last, creating a dense, suffocating atmosphere where reconciliation felt simultaneously necessary and impossible. As tears flowed freely, voices rose in anger and despair, and moments of stunned silence punctuated the chaos, a fragile respite before the next surge of emotion threatened to overwhelm the room. While Yandy and Mendeecees' influence lingered like an unseen force, their prior interventions casting long shadows over every decision and interaction, reminding the family that truth could not be avoided, that every concealment and every denial had been pierced, leaving no room for the comfortable illusions that had sustained them. And in this charged environment, conversations stretched long into the day, each member grappling with guilt, regret, fear, and the urgent need to assert their perspectives while also understanding those of others, creating a relentless cycle of dialogue that was as exhausting as it was revealing, exposing vulnerabilities, testing patience, and forcing compromises that felt tentative at best. And yet, amid the storms of anger and despair, glimmers of understanding began to emerge, small acknowledgments of responsibility, moments of empathy, and fleeting gestures of reconciliation that hinted at the possibility of progress. Though the path was perilous and littered with the remnants of broken trust, and as evening descended upon the Frost household, the atmosphere shifted subtly but unmistakably, a mixture of exhaustion and cautious hope settling over the family as they retreated to separate spaces to reflect on the proper emotional maelstrom of the day, the weight of what had been revealed pressing heavily on every heart and mind. And in the solitude of their rooms, each member faced the raw and unfiltered consequences of the confrontations, replaying words spoken and actions taken, feeling the sting of betrayal, the pang of regret, and the complex swirl of emotions that only truth, when unmasked so completely, can provoke. While outside, friends, extended family, and fans continued to react to snippets of the drama, the Frost's private turmoil spilling into public consciousness, fueling speculation, judgment, and fascination in ways that only added to the intensity of the household. And yet, even under the scrutiny, even under the relentless emotional strain, moments of clarity began to appear, small realizations that forgiveness might be possible, that accountability might be embraced, that honesty, painful as it was, could serve as a foundation for rebuilding the fragile bonds that had been fractured. And, slowly, Tentatively, members began to reach out to one another. Tentative words bridging the chasms of hurt. Subtle gestures signaling a willingness to listen, to empathize, and perhaps, to reconcile. Though every interaction was tinged with the awareness that any misstep could ignite the embers of unresolved anger, sending them spiraling back into conflict. And as the night deepened, the Frost household became a quiet crucible of reflection, each individual weighing the day's revelations, each word, each accusation, each tear, and beginning the painstaking process of navigating the complex web of emotions, trust, and loyalty that had defined their relationships, all under the lingering shadow of Yandy and Mendeecees' intervention, whose presence, though absent physically, was felt in the careful, deliberate way the family now confronted truths they had long ignored. And as the hours passed, small conversations turned into tentative reconciliations, apologies whispered and accepted with cautious sincerity, long-held grievances acknowledged, and a sense of fragile hope began to take root, though the reality remained that the journey toward healing would be slow, fraught with emotional landmines, and shaped forever by the intensity of the confrontations that had laid bare the complexities, flaws, and vulnerabilities of the Frost family, leaving them forever changed, more aware, more cautious, but also more connected through the shared experience of facing truths that could no longer be denied. And as the first light of morning crept through the windows, the Frost household settled into an uneasy calm, a temporary reprieve that carried with it the promise of continued reflection, ongoing dialogue, and the uncertain but inevitable march toward understanding, accountability, and the difficult, sometimes painful, but necessary work of rebuilding trust, bonds, and a sense of family unity that had been tested, strained, and irrevocably altered by the revelations that Yandy and Mendeecees had so boldly and unflinchingly brought to light. The Frost household awoke to a fragile dawn, the aftermath of days filled with confrontation and revelation, leaving every member in a haze of reflection, apprehension, and emotional fatigue, the previous storms of anger, betrayal, and raw confession still echoing in their minds, manifesting intense glances, cautious speech, and an almost tangible tension that permeated every corner of the home. And as the morning wore on, small moments of daily life became exercises in restraint, each conversation carefully measured, each movement deliberate, as though any misstep could reignite the embers of conflict that had been stoked by Yandy and Mendeecees' incisive revelations, while underneath the surface, unresolved grievances and lingering suspicions simmered, threading through the interactions like an unbroken undercurrent that shaped tone, posture, and speech. And yet, amid the delicate negotiation of cohabitation, subtle signs of adaptation began to appear, gestures of tentative connection that were fragile yet meaningful, a hand offered over a cup of coffee, a fleeting eye contact that lingered longer than usual, a quiet nod acknowledging the pain and effort of those around them. And these small signals created moments of balance, pauses in the relentless emotional current that had dominated the past days, offering glimpses of the possibility that, despite the intensity of conflict, reconciliation, understanding, and empathy could emerge if nurtured with care and patience. And in the living room, where discussions of long-suppressed truths had previously escalated into heated confrontations, there now began to form spaces for calmer, more reflective dialogue, voices still tinged with vulnerability and residual tension, but with a new layer of willingness to listen and to absorb the perspectives of others, an acknowledgement that every member carried their own burdens, insecurities, and regrets, and that moving forward required deliberate engagement with those realities, a mutual recognition that honesty, no matter how painful, could serve as the scaffolding for the reconstruction of trust and the repair of fractured relationships. While in other parts of the home, quieter exchanges unfolded, siblings sharing whispered confessions, parents offering measured guidance, moments punctuated by tears, sighs, and the occasional tremor of laughter. As the sheer relief of being heard and acknowledged began to cut through the residual tension, and throughout the day, the Frosts engaged in acts both symbolic and practical, efforts to demonstrate commitment to one another and to rebuild bonds that had been strained by secrecy and misunderstanding. From collaborative household tasks approached with new care to shared meals where the clinking of utensils carried a weight of attentiveness, each small gesture reinforcing the possibility that emotional bridges could be restored, even as the family collectively absorbed the magnitude of the truths laid bare, truths that had forced reevaluation of priorities, perceptions, and personal responsibilities, challenging long-held assumptions about loyalty, justice, and forgiveness. And in the course of these interactions, unexpected alliances began to emerge, Siblings previously estranged, finding common ground. Parents reconsidering past judgments in light of candid disclosures. And even those who had been most resistant to engagement demonstrating signs of softening, their responses less defensive, more attuned to the realities of the shared history and the need for mutual understanding. While outside the household, observers and fans continued to follow the unfolding drama. Social media abuzz with theories, interpretations, and analyses that mirrored and magnified the internal turbulence of the family. The external attention adding pressure, yet also providing a context in which the Frosts could confront their dynamics under a sort of imposed scrutiny, forcing clarity, articulation, and commitment to honesty. And by late afternoon, the family collectively undertook deeper conversations about accountability and reconciliation, acknowledging missteps, expressing vulnerability, and tentatively exploring pathways toward restored trust. The dialogue intense, immersive, and emotionally charged, punctuated by raw confessions, measured apologies, and the careful navigation of sensitivities that had previously been ignored or suppressed. And as evening fell, the Frosts began to consolidate these moments of understanding, translating fleeting insights into actionable commitments, each member reflecting on the interplay between personal responsibility and collective well-being, recognizing that true healing required sustained effort, repeated engagement, and a willingness to face discomfort, while at the same time nurturing empathy, patience, and respect for one another's experiences and emotions. The lessons of the past days leaving indelible impressions, reshaping perceptions, and laying the groundwork for a more deliberate and conscientious approach to family dynamics. And in the quiet of the night, as lights dimmed and voices softened, the household settled into a complex but steady rhythm, a mixture of fatigue, relief, and cautious optimism, each individual contemplating the journey they had been forced to undertake, the exposure of secrets, the confrontation of painful truths, and the tentative steps toward rebuilding connections that had been strained for years. The atmosphere heavy with reflection, yet imbued with the faint promise that the Frosts, though tested, could emerge stronger, more and more unified if they continued to engage with honesty, courage, and the deliberate choice to prioritize understanding over defensiveness. While the shadows of Yandy and Mendeecees' influence lingered, a reminder that the catalyst for change had come from outside, yet had ignited internal transformation. And as the family drifted toward sleep, the weight of the day pressed upon them, but so too did a fragile sense of progress, a recognition that despite the turbulence, the willingness to face difficult truths and to engage in the painstaking work of emotional repair had begun, creating a foundation for future dialogue, connection, and the slow but steady rebuilding of trust, intimacy, and familial cohesion. The echoes of past confrontations serving not merely as wounds, but as catalysts for growth, empathy, and the deepening of bonds that, though challenged, had not been broken. And in this liminal space between turmoil and resolution, the Frost family began to navigate the intricate balance of accountability, forgiveness, and relational restoration, fully aware that the path ahead would demand perseverance, emotional honesty, and the constant negotiation of vulnerability and strength, yet embracing the journey with the awareness that the revelations, confrontations, and raw exchanges of the recent days, painful as they had been, held within them the seeds of enduring transformation, a redefined understanding of connection, and the hope that even the deepest fissures could, with effort and intentionality, be healed. The following morning, a tense quiet hung over the Frost household, thick with the residue of prior confrontations and the relentless swirl of emotions that had dominated the days leading up to it. Each member moving cautiously through familiar spaces, now laden with memories of raw accusations, emotional confessions, and long-buried grievances that had been dragged into the harsh light by Yandy and Mendeecees, the weight of which seemed almost tangible in the very air they breathed. And as the family gathered, even for the most mundane of morning routines, each interaction carried a subtext of scrutiny, hesitation, and unspoken fear, where a glance, a sigh, or a slightly raised voice could ignite sparks of past resentments into a full emotional blaze, while simultaneously the tentative gestures of reconciliation, apologies whispered under breath, and small acts of attentiveness created fragile threads of connection, suggesting that despite the intensity of the upheaval, there remained a possibility for the rebuilding of trust and understanding. And yet, as the day progressed, these threads were tested repeatedly by the surfacing of additional tensions, disputes over past decisions, accusations of favoritism, and reminders of previous betrayals that had been dormant but never forgotten. Every conversation, every attempt at dialogue carrying both the potential for healing and the risk of reigniting conflict. And within this charged atmosphere, the family engaged in a delicate dance of emotional navigation, balancing the desire to confront and express their pain with the need to maintain some semblance of civility, often teetering on the edge of verbal explosions as unresolved grievances collided with the vulnerability required for honest communication. While outside the household, the ongoing scrutiny of friends, extended family, and fans of love and hip-hop amplified the pressure, as each detail, reaction, and subtle shift was dissected, speculated upon, and broadcast, adding an additional layer of tension to the already volatile environment, creating a sense that the private struggle of the Frosts had transformed into a public performance of emotional endurance, scrutiny, and resilience. And yet within this crucible, moments of genuine connection began to emerge, fleeting yet powerful, where siblings shared tentative acknowledgments of past misunderstandings, parents offered measured words of guidance and empathy, and even those most entrenched in defensiveness began to soften in response to the raw honesty and persistent pursuit of truth encouraged by Yandy and Mendeecees, whose presence, though absent physically, loomed large in the consciousness of the family, a constant reminder that avoidance was no longer an option and that the only path forward required confrontation, accountability, and a willingness to embrace discomfort for the sake of deeper understanding. And as afternoon turned to evening, the dynamics of the household shifted subtly but perceptibly, with small acts of reconciliation, shared laughter over a recollection, a hand offered in comfort, a genuine apology marking the tentative reconstruction of relational bonds that had been strained for years, while simultaneously, undercurrents of tension remained, reminders of the fragility of progress and the persistent shadows of old wounds that could resurface at any moment, making every conversation a careful negotiation of intent, emotion, and perception, a tightrope walk over the chasms of mistrust and lingering resentment. And throughout these interactions, the Frost family became acutely aware of their own vulnerabilities, the necessity of empathy, and the importance of clear communication, recognizing that healing would be neither immediate nor easy, but that persistent effort, honesty, and attentiveness could gradually restore connections that had been threatened by secrecy, omission, and misunderstanding. And as night fell, the household found a rhythm that combined exhaustion with cautious hope, each member retreating to private spaces for reflection while simultaneously considering the ways in which they could contribute to the collective restoration of trust and familial cohesion. The lessons of confrontation and revelation lingering in the mind like both a burden and a guide, reminding them of the fragility of relationships, the power of truth, and the imperative of emotional responsibility, while the echoes of Yandy and Mendeecees' influence continued to shape every thought, conversation, and interaction, the family navigating a complex web of emotion, reflection, and tentative action, each step taken with an awareness of its potential consequences. And through the long night, private reflections turned to planning, discussions of accountability, and small commitments to change, with each family member recognizing the necessity of embracing honesty, compassion, and vulnerability, not only for the sake of relational repair but also for personal growth. And even as fatigue settled over the household, moments of insight and connection offered the promise that the turbulence of the past days, though painful, had initiated a transformative process, one in which trust could be rebuilt, communication could be strengthened, and the shared bonds of the Frost family could, over time, evolve into a more resilient, empathetic, and transparent network of relationships, a process catalyzed by the fearless confrontation of truths that could no longer be ignored, the exposure of long-held secrets, and the insistence that each individual face the consequences of both action and inaction. And as the first light of a new day broke through, the Frosts, weary yet reflective, carried with them the weight of what had been revealed, the scars of conflict, the lessons of transparency, and the fragile hope that, with continued effort, patience, and emotional courage, the fractures within their family could gradually be healed, giving way to a new chapter defined by awareness, empathy, and the deliberate, painstaking work of rebuilding not just trust, but a renewed understanding of loyalty, connection, and the enduring power of confronting the truths that shape the lives of those bound together by blood, love, and shared history, a journey neither linear nor simple, but necessary, inevitable, and transformative, leaving the Frost family forever altered, more conscious of their own vulnerabilities, more attentive to each other's needs, and more committed to the ongoing labor of navigating the intricate, sometimes painful, yet profoundly human terrain of familial relationships under the relentless scrutiny of their own hearts and the watchful eyes of a captivated audience. Morning arrived again in the Frost household with a heavy, almost suffocating stillness. The events of the prior day's confrontations, revelations, confessions, and tears still lingering in the minds of every family member, shaping each thought, each movement, each exchange with a weight that felt almost impossible to lift. And as the household moved through its morning routines, even the simplest acts, pouring coffee, setting the table, brushing teeth, were tinged with a carefulness born of unspoken understanding that the fragile emotional equilibrium could shatter at any misstep. And in the kitchen, where the most mundane conversations might once have taken place with casual ease, every sentence was laden with subtext, every glance interpreted for hidden meaning, as siblings and parents alike navigated the complex terrain of unresolved grievances, past betrayals, and lingering mistrust, all amplified by the specter of Yandy and Mendeecees' prior interventions, which had pierced through the family's carefully maintained facade of harmony, to expose the raw and uncomfortable truths that had been long ignored or suppressed. And as discussions began to emerge, small tensions escalated almost imperceptibly into sharper disputes, as one sibling questioned another's intentions, recalling long-forgotten incidents that now, in the light of recent revelations, seemed more consequential, while the other, defensive yet weary, struggled to justify choices made years earlier, each word carrying the weight of accumulated history, guilt, resentment, and emotion, the room almost vibrating with the intensity of their interaction. While elsewhere, parents attempted to mediate with carefully measured words, seeking to balance accountability with empathy, knowing that any misstep could deepen rifts rather than mend them. And yet, even as these tensions unfolded, the Frost household experienced subtle undercurrents of reconciliation, small gestures of connection, an arm briefly draped over a shoulder, a tentative nod of understanding, a quiet expression of regret that suggested the possibility of repair, however delicate. And in the hours that followed, conversations stretched long into the day, oscillating between moments of raw confrontation and fragile attempts at dialogue, each family member confronting not only the actions and choices of others but their own complicity, avoidance, or silence, grappling with the recognition that personal responsibility and honesty were indispensable to any hope of rebuilding trust. And in these hours, old alliances shifted, perceptions changed, and the fabric of the family's relationships began to bend and stretch under the strain of emotional truth. Some members finding newfound empathy for those they had previously condemned, others confronting the stark realities of their own mistakes with a mixture of shame, regret, and determination, while the eyes of the world fans, extended family continued to peer into the Frosts' lives, social media buzzing with speculation, commentary, and judgment that only heightened the pressure, reinforcing the necessity for transparency, the urgency of understanding, and the undeniable reality that every word and action was now a public performance as much as a private endeavor. Yet within this crucible, seeds of transformation were sown, moments of genuine recognition and tentative forgiveness, creating a delicate scaffolding upon which the family could begin to rebuild, while simultaneously, the undercurrents of tension and the potential for relapse into conflict remained ever present, a reminder that healing would require sustained attention, patience, and courage. And as evening approached, the Frosts attempted to consolidate their insights, reflections, and small reconciliations into actionable commitments. Discussions turning to how to prevent future misunderstandings, how to maintain open channels of communication, and how to hold one another accountable in ways that fostered connection rather than division, while acknowledging that old wounds would continue to surface and require careful attention. And even as exhaustion settled over the household, moments of laughter, shared memory, and quiet understanding offered glimpses of what was possible, demonstrating that even after the most intense upheaval, the human capacity for empathy, repair, and connection could prevail, though it required conscious effort and vulnerability. And in the quiet of the night, private reflection dominated, each member contemplating the day's tumult, revisiting words spoken, promises made, and the lessons learned from both conflict and compromise, recognizing that the work of emotional repair was ongoing, non-linear, and sometimes exhausting, but essential if the Frost family hoped to emerge stronger, more aware, and more resilient, while simultaneously processing the profound influence of Yandy and Mendeecees, whose intervention had served as both catalyst and mirror, exposing not only the faults and failures of the family but also the potential for growth, empathy, and renewal. And as the household settled into a tentative rhythm, balancing vigilance with cautious optimism, the Frosts understood that trust, once fractured, could be rebuilt, that apologies and confessions could create pathways toward healing, and that the commitment to sustained honesty, accountability, and emotional openness was the only true safeguard against repeating the patterns that had previously undermined their relationships. all while knowing that external scrutiny would remain. Fans and observers keenly attuned to each development, each emotional nuance, and that the family's ability to navigate both their private turmoil and the public gaze would define not only the restoration of their internal bonds, but the narrative that the wider world would remember. And as the hours of night deepened into silence, the Frosts continued to wrestle internally with the interplay of guilt, empathy, anger, and love, contemplating the intricate dynamics of loyalty, trust, and forgiveness, recognizing that the revelations they had confronted were not isolated incidents but threads woven throughout the fabric of their shared history, requiring careful, intentional, and ongoing work to untangle and reweave into something sustainable, meaningful, and resilient. And in this suspended, introspective state, there emerged a quiet recognition that while the path ahead would be fraught with challenges, the very act of facing their truths, expressing vulnerability, and engaging in deliberate emotional labor was itself a transformative process, one that could, over time, repair fractures, deepen understanding, and strengthen bonds that had been tested, strained, and exposed to the harsh glare of both familial scrutiny and public fascination, leaving the Frost family forever changed, more conscious of their own limitations and strengths, more attuned to the needs and perspectives of one another, and more committed to the painstaking, ongoing work of nurturing trust, connection, and a sense of unity amidst the lingering shadows of past betrayals, conflicts, and concealed truths, a process both daunting and necessary, ultimately defining the next chapter of their lives as one of accountability, empathy, and the relentless pursuit of reconciliation in the face of adversity, emotional complexity, and the enduring consequences of their choices and actions. As the new day unfolded within the Frost household, the atmosphere remained thick with the residue of past confrontations, the revelations unearthed by Yandy and Mendeecees still echoing in every room, in every gesture, in every unspoken glance, shaping interactions with an intensity that left no space for casual conversation or emotional evasion. And as family members moved through the familiar routines of breakfast, tidying, and preparation for the day, each action carried a weight far beyond its ordinary function, laden with the memories of harsh words exchanged, tears shed, and secrets exposed. The air electric with unspoken tension and anticipation of the next moment when old grievances might resurface. And yet within this charged environment, small gestures of connection began to emerge, tentative and fragile, a hand extended over a cup of coffee, a brief touch on a shoulder, a quiet acknowledgement of the other's presence. Acts that, while minor in isolation, took on profound significance within the context of weeks of heightened emotional turbulence. And as the hours stretched on, conversations alternated between careful, reflective dialogue and bursts of intense emotion, arguments flaring over past misunderstandings, perceived betrayals, and lingering insecurities. Each family member navigating the complex interplay of vulnerability, defensiveness, and the desire to be heard, while the shadow of Yandy and Mendeecees' interventions loomed, a reminder that avoidance was no longer possible, that every hidden truth, every unspoken grievance, had been brought to the surface, and that the family could no longer operate under the illusion of harmony without reckoning with the realities that had long been ignored. And as the morning gave way to afternoon, the emotional landscape became increasingly layered and intricate, with some siblings forming temporary alliances in shared acknowledgement of past slights, while others confronted each other over discrepancies in perception, miscommunications, or unresolved conflicts. The air dense with the tension of simultaneous cooperation and confrontation, empathy and resentment, hope and fear. And as new disclosures came to light, long-hidden personal decisions, financial missteps, or moments of perceived favoritism, the household's fragile equilibrium was tested repeatedly, forcing members to confront not only the actions of others, but their own role in perpetuating misunderstandings, avoidance, or silence, while external pressures compounded the internal strain. Social media commentary, friends' opinions, and extended families' observations providing both validation and critique, intensifying the need for clarity, honesty, and deliberate communication. And within this dynamic, subtle shifts began to occur. Moments of tentative understanding blossoming into meaningful dialogue, confessions of long-suppressed regret eliciting empathy, apologies offered and tentatively accepted serving as the first building blocks of renewed trust, yet always undergirded by the awareness that these fragile advances could be easily undone by a misstep, a misinterpreted word, or a resurgence of old resentment. And as evening approached, the household began to coalesce around routines that balanced reflection with interaction. each member engaging in acts both symbolic and practical to demonstrate commitment to familial bonds. From shared meals approached with attentive presence to collaborative household tasks undertaken with renewed care, each act reinforcing the possibility that, despite the turbulence, repair was possible if approached with intentionality, patience, and sustained emotional effort. And in the quiet moments between these interactions, private reflections deepened, each individual replaying events, reconsidering their responses, and contemplating strategies to navigate both the lingering internal tension and the external gaze of an invested public, recognizing that the path to reconciliation required both courage and humility, a willingness to confront discomfort, and the conscious effort to balance self-expression with empathetic listening. And as night settled over the household, the family moved into a tentative calm, marked by fatigue, reflection, and cautious hope, the intensity of prior conflicts giving way to quieter, more deliberate interactions, where subtle gestures, a soft word, a shared glance, an acknowledgement of another's struggle served as reminders of the potential for connection amidst chaos, while the ongoing influence of Yandy and Mendeecees remained palpable, a silent guide encouraging continued honesty, accountability, and introspection. And as the hours deepened into silence, each member of the Frost family engaged in an internal dialogue as powerful and complex as any outward confrontation, weighing the impact of their words, the significance of past choices, and the responsibilities inherent in rebuilding trust and repairing fractured relationships, recognizing that the work ahead was neither simple nor linear, that progress would require continuous attention, deliberate engagement, and the courage to face recurring emotional challenges, yet also understanding that the very act of confronting these truths, of embracing vulnerability, and of engaging in sincere efforts at repair was itself transformative, laying the groundwork for the re-establishment of bonds, the strengthening of familial loyalty, and the creation of a more transparent, empathetic, and resilient family dynamic. And even as fatigue and emotional exhaustion pressed upon them, there emerged within the Frost household a recognition of the potential embedded in these painful revelations, the capacity for growth, the opportunity to redefine connections, and the necessity of sustained, intentional emotional labor. Each member aware that the lessons learned from the past confrontations, confessions, and exposures were tools to navigate the ongoing complexities of their relationships, to anticipate and mitigate conflict, to foster understanding, and to build a more secure foundation for the future. And as dawn approached once more, the Frost family, though changed and irrevocably altered by the intensity of recent days, carried within them a cautious optimism, a sense that despite the turbulence, the fractures exposed could be healed, the bonds tested could be strengthened, and the shared experience of confronting uncomfortable truths could ultimately serve to fortify the family against both internal and external challenges, leaving them poised on the threshold of a new chapter defined by empathy and the unrelenting pursuit of trust, understanding, and relational cohesion, all under the persistent, silent influence of the truths uncovered and the lessons imparted by Yandy and Mendeecees, whose intervention had irrevocably shifted the trajectory of the Frost household, forcing reflection, demanding accountability, and planting the seeds for profound, enduring transformation that would continue to shape the family's interactions, decisions, and emotional landscape in the days, months, and years to come. The day after the tense dawn in the Frost household, a new layer of complexity settled over the family, the residual tension of prior confrontations, confessions, and revelations interweaving with the faint threads of emerging understanding and tentative reconciliation. Each interaction now a delicate negotiation between honesty and self-protection, vulnerability and defensiveness, while every glance, every tone, every movement was carefully scrutinized, not only by the family members themselves but by the ever-present shadow of Yandy and Mendeecees' influence, a reminder that the truths that had been exposed were not fleeting, that the revelations had permanently altered the emotional topography of the household. And as the morning progressed, small but meaningful attempts at connection began to surface. A shared cup of coffee in silence that conveyed acknowledgement and empathy, a tentative word of apology muttered under the guise of casual conversation, a fleeting smile that seemed to bridge the chasm of resentment that had loomed over previous days. And yet these moments were always tempered by the knowledge that the potential for conflict remained. A misinterpreted phrase or a sudden flare of emotion capable of undoing the fragile threads of understanding that had begun to form, creating a constant undercurrent of tension that kept each family member alert, self-aware and cautious. And in this atmosphere, conversations oscillated between candid confessions and careful negotiation, siblings confronting each other over perceived past slights, Parents mediating disputes with careful attention, each word, each pause, each gesture loaded with significance, as old patterns of interaction collided with the new, altered dynamics imposed by the exposure of secrets. And as the day deepened, new revelations surfaced almost organically, small details previously overlooked or deliberately ignored now emerging in casual exchanges, prompting fresh waves of reflection, defensiveness, or remorse. And as these disclosures accumulated, the family navigated the dual challenge of processing the emotional weight of what had been revealed while simultaneously attempting to sustain tentative progress toward trust, understanding, and emotional cohesion. And amid this relentless emotional engagement, moments of genuine connection began to crystallize, a sibling extending comfort without expectation, a parent offering measured support without judgment, subtle signs of empathy and recognition that suggested the possibility of rebuilding relational bonds that had been frayed, strained, or broken over the years. Even as the specter of past grievances lingered, a reminder that the process of reconciliation was neither simple nor immediate, but rather a painstaking endeavor requiring patience, honesty, and a continual willingness to confront discomfort, to acknowledge mistakes, and to accept responsibility. And outside the household, observers, friends, extended family, fans of love and hip-hop continued to amplify the intensity, speculating on motives, interpreting interactions, and scrutinizing every nuance, adding an external layer of pressure that magnified both the challenges and the stakes of every conversation, while simultaneously providing a lens through which the family could measure progress, accountability, and the effectiveness of their reconciliatory efforts. And as afternoons stretched into evening, the Frost household engaged in a delicate balance of collective reflection and individual processing, each member retreating at intervals to consider the implications of past words, current interactions, and future commitments, while also re-engaging in dialogue that oscillated between tension, vulnerability, and tentative resolution. And as night fell, the home was filled with a mixture of quiet contemplation, subtle gestures of care, and the persistent hum of unspoken questions, the emotional weight of the previous days settling into the consciousness of each member as they contemplated how to navigate the continuing demands of transparency, accountability, and connection, while simultaneously managing the inherent complexities of human emotion, memory, and relational history. And in the stillness of the late hours, each member grappled with personal reflections, processing not only the actions of others but the patterns of their own behavior, the choices they had made, and the responsibilities they bore for both past harms and future healing. The process both exhausting and illuminating, fostering moments of clarity, empathy, and insight that had previously been inaccessible in the heat of confrontation. And as the household moved through cycles of dialogue, reflection, and subtle interaction, the family began to map a path forward, identifying areas where trust could be cautiously rebuilt, acknowledging where wounds remained raw, and committing to sustained efforts to maintain honesty, openness, and accountability, understanding that the journey would be fraught with setbacks, emotional turbulence, and occasional regret, yet recognizing that the very act of engaging with one another in deliberate, conscientious, and vulnerable ways constituted progress. And as the days unfolded, patterns of constructive engagement began to take hold, small victories in communication, mutual acknowledgement, and empathy accumulating into a more resilient, aware, and connected familial dynamic, while the memory of Yandy and Mendeecees' intervention lingered as a catalyst, a reminder of the power of truth, confrontation, and fearless honesty to initiate transformation. And as the Frost family continued to navigate the intricacies of their internal landscape, the household gradually evolved into a space where emotional expression, accountability, and attentive interaction became not only possible but increasingly natural, signaling a profound, though painstaking, shift in relationships, perceptions, and personal growth. The revelations that had once threatened to permanently fracture bonds now serving as a foundation upon which deeper understanding, stronger connection, and a more enduring familial cohesion could be constructed. And even as external pressures persisted, the internal mechanisms of reflection, dialogue, and intentional engagement provided the tools necessary to maintain equilibrium, repair damage, and foster resilience, leaving the Frost household transformed, not merely by the exposure of secrets, but by the sustained, deliberate, and emotionally courageous efforts of each member to confront truth, embrace vulnerability, and commit to the ongoing labor of trust, empathy, and relational restoration, a transformation that would continue to shape interactions, decisions, and emotional dynamics for months and years to come. forging a family more self-aware, more compassionate, and more capable of navigating the complexities of human emotion, loyalty, and connection under the enduring weight of both personal and shared history. The Frost household awoke yet again to the lingering echoes of the upheaval that had swept through their lives. The aftermath of confrontations, revelations, and unearthing of long-held secrets, creating an almost tangible tension in every corner of the home. A pervasive heaviness that pressed on conversations, movements, and even moments of silence. And as the morning unfolded, each family member moved with a careful deliberateness, wary of missteps, conscious of the fragile emotional scaffolding that had begun to form from tentative gestures of reconciliation and reluctant admissions of fault. And in the kitchen, where breakfast became both sustenance and subtle negotiation, the air vibrated with the weight of what had been said, what remained unspoken, and what had yet to surface, as siblings exchanged measured words, tinged with residual resentment, curiosity, and the faintest flickers of empathy. Parents offered guidance laced with concern and the subtle recognition of their own complicity. And through it all, the shadow of Yandy and Mendeecees' interventions loomed, a reminder that nothing hidden could remain so, that honesty had been thrust upon them, and that the path forward required not only acknowledgement of past mistakes but also the conscious labor of rebuilding trust, establishing new patterns of interaction, and navigating the complex emotional terrain that stretched across every relationship within the family. And as the day wore on, the rhythm of tension and tentative connection continued to evolve, arguments flaring and subsiding in waves, confessions met with surprise, pain, or understanding, apologies offered and weighed, all woven together in a continuous tapestry of raw emotion, introspection, and relational negotiation. While external observers, extended family, fans continued to watch, comment, and speculate, their perceptions amplifying the stakes, shaping internal dynamics, and creating a sense that the Frost family's journey toward repair was not merely personal but public, subject to scrutiny, judgment, and interpretation. And within this environment, moments of unexpected connection emerged, small but profound. A shared glance that conveyed unspoken understanding, a fleeting touch that offered reassurance, a whispered acknowledgement of another's pain, all acting as fragile yet powerful counterpoints to the intensity of conflict. And as the afternoon deepened into evening, the household engaged in more structured attempts at communication, conversations turning toward actionable commitments, reflections on patterns of behavior, and deliberate consideration of how to prevent past grievances from dictating the future. Each member contending with their own emotional triggers, vulnerabilities, and long-standing habits while simultaneously striving to understand and accommodate the experiences and perspectives of others. And in these exchanges, the duality of progress and fragility became apparent. Every word and gesture potentially advancing reconciliation or rekindling discord, necessitating careful attention, patience, and the conscious choice to prioritize understanding over reaction. While the cumulative weight of days of reflection, confrontation, and exposure pressed upon the family, fostering both fatigue and clarity, the exhaustion of emotional labor intermingling with moments of insight and connection, revealing the contours of relational truth and the responsibilities inherent in sustaining family bonds. And as night descended, the household settled into a tenuous calm, punctuated by private reflection, quiet conversations, and subtle gestures of care, each member contemplating not only the events that had transpired but also the implications for their future interactions, the commitments required to maintain trust, and the ongoing necessity of confronting discomfort, embracing accountability, and engaging in sustained, intentional dialogue. While the lessons imparted by Yandy and Mendeecees' earlier interventions remained ever present, a guiding force reminding the Frosts that the exposure of secrets, no matter how painful, could serve as the catalyst for transformation, deeper connection, and a more conscious approach to relational dynamics. And as the hours passed, the family increasingly recognized that the labor of emotional repair was continuous, demanding vigilance, empathy, and deliberate effort, with each conversation, gesture, and reflection contributing incrementally to the slow reconstruction of trust, intimacy, and mutual understanding. And even as residual tension lingered, moments of genuine connection, acknowledgement, and shared vulnerability demonstrated the possibility of resilience, growth, and relational renewal, suggesting that the turbulence of the past days, though intense, had planted the seeds for a transformed family dynamic, one in which honesty, accountability, and empathy became not optional but foundational. And as the night deepened into the quiet hours, the Frost's reflections extended beyond immediate circumstances, encompassing broader questions of loyalty, forgiveness, and the enduring influence of individual choices on collective harmony. The interplay of past and present shaping both perception and expectation, and instilling a recognition that the journey of familial repair would demand ongoing engagement, courage to confront emerging challenges, and the sustained effort to balance personal needs with the collective well-being of the household, while simultaneously navigating the persistent awareness that the external gaze friends, fans, social media observers would continue to monitor, interpret, and amplify their progress and missteps, adding layers of accountability and complexity to an already intricate web of relational repair. And yet within this dynamic, the Frost family began to cultivate an emerging sense of agency, a recognition that despite the weight of past mistakes, the turbulence of recent confrontations, and the intensity of emotional exposure, their actions, choices, and intentions could actively shape the trajectory of healing, trust, and understanding. That vulnerability, courage, and consistent engagement could gradually fortify connections once strained or damaged, and that the painstaking labor of relational reconstruction, though fraught with setbacks, misunderstandings, and emotional risk, held the promise of lasting transformation, deeper empathy, and a more resilient family structure. A realization that infused subsequent interactions with deliberation, awareness, and intentionality, guiding behavior, communication, and emotional response in ways that balanced self-expression with receptivity, past accountability with future possibility, and individual perspective with collective welfare. And through the long night, as the household alternated between moments of reflection, shared insight, and quiet acknowledgement, the Frost family gradually wove together the fractured threads of trust, communication, and understanding into a more cohesive, though still evolving, relational fabric, recognizing that the journey ahead required sustained vigilance, patience, and a commitment to embracing discomfort, owning mistakes, and supporting one another through the ongoing process of reconciliation, while simultaneously integrating the lessons learned from the disruptive but illuminating interventions of Yandy and Mendeecees, whose revelations had permanently altered the landscape of family dynamics, forcing awareness, catalyzing introspection, and providing the impetus for transformation. And as the first light of a new dawn edged into the household, the Frosts, weary but resolute, carried within them both the heavy weight of their past mistakes and the cautious optimism born of deliberate engagement, reflection, and the early fruits of renewed understanding. The recognition that their relationships, though tested and strained, could be reconstructed through honesty, accountability, and sustained emotional effort, and that the journey of repair, while neither simple nor immediate, was a necessary path toward resilience, connection, and the cultivation of a family dynamic grounded in empathy, mutual respect, and the unwavering acknowledgement of truth, no matter how painful, challenging, or transformative it might be, leaving the household poised on the cusp of continued evolution, where the echoes of past conflict, the lessons of exposure, and the intentionality of present action converged to shape the enduring course of familial life, emotional growth, and the relentless pursuit of trust, understanding, and cohesion that would define the Frost family's path for the foreseeable future, signaling a chapter both arduous and hopeful, where vulnerability, courage, and the deliberate practice of relational care promised not only recovery from recent storms but the construction of a more resilient, aware, and profoundly connected family unit capable of navigating the complexities of human emotion, history, and accountability with deliberate intention and enduring commitment. The Frost household, now steeped in the aftermath of days of confrontation, revelation, and emotional turbulence, moved through the hours with a heightened awareness that every word, gesture, and expression carried weight far beyond its ordinary significance. Each family member navigating a complex landscape of lingering resentment, emerging empathy, and cautious attempts at connection, as the air within the home remained thick with the echoes of Yandy and Mendeecees' prior interventions, their exposure of long-hidden truths casting a persistent shadow over interactions, forcing the Frosts to confront not only the actions of others but also their own patterns of avoidance, silence, and complicity. And as the morning stretched into afternoon, conversations oscillated between tentative reconciliation and renewed tension, siblings addressing past slights, while simultaneously seeking acknowledgement of their own vulnerabilities, parents mediating with careful attention to prevent escalation while also acknowledging their own role in past misunderstandings, and small gestures of empathy, an arm resting briefly on a shoulder, a quiet word of reassurance, a shared moment of understanding offered subtle, yet powerful, indications that repair, though fragile, was possible. Yet every interaction remained charged with the potential for conflict. A single misinterpreted tone, a recalled grievance, or an unguarded remark capable of reigniting disputes. And amidst this delicate balance, the family confronted the multifaceted nature of trust, forgiveness, and accountability, the past and present converging as they grappled with questions of loyalty, fairness, and the impact of prior decisions on current relationships, while simultaneously negotiating the pressures of external observation. With social media speculation, friends' commentary, and extended family scrutiny amplifying both the significance of each action and the stakes of emotional disclosure. And as the hours progressed, the Frosts found themselves engaged in a continuous cycle of reflection, dialogue, and subtle negotiation, weighing the consequences of words spoken and unspoken, assessing the authenticity of apologies, and attempting to reconcile conflicting emotions of hurt, guilt, empathy, and love, all while recognizing that the process of healing required sustained effort, deliberate intention, and the courage to confront discomfort, to admit mistakes, and to accept responsibility not only for past transgressions but also for the ongoing maintenance of relational integrity. And as evening approached, patterns began to emerge within the household. Small victories in communication, acknowledgement, and collaborative problem-solving gradually reinforcing the potential for deeper connection, trust, and understanding, while simultaneously revealing the ongoing challenges inherent in the human capacity for empathy, forgiveness, and change. And as night settled in, the Frost family engaged in both shared and private reflection, considering the long-term implications of recent events, the lessons to be learned from exposure and confrontation, and the personal commitments required to sustain progress. The weight of accumulated emotion, historical grievance, and public scrutiny interweaving to create a complex, sometimes exhausting, but ultimately instructive fabric of experience. And within this environment, subtle transformations occurred. Siblings who had previously resisted vulnerability now initiated honest conversations. Parents offered measured guidance that balanced firmness with compassion. And even those most resistant to accountability began to recognize the value of transparency, dialogue, and deliberate emotional engagement. As the household slowly recalibrated its dynamics, learning to navigate the tension between autonomy and interdependence, individual need and collective well-being, past mistakes and future possibility, while the ongoing influence of Yandy and Mendeecees remained a constant, a reminder that the act of revealing truth, confronting discomfort, and challenging entrenched patterns could catalyze profound change. And as the quiet of late night enveloped the home, the Frosts' reflections extended beyond immediate concerns, encompassing broader questions of identity, responsibility, and relational legacy, each member contemplating not only their role in recent conflicts but also their capacity to contribute to a sustained culture of accountability, empathy, and mutual support, the interplay of past experiences and future aspirations informing decisions, responses, and priorities. And as the hours continued to deepen into silence, the household's internal rhythm shifted subtly, the frenetic energy of conflict giving way to deliberate calm, moments of laughter, shared memory, and tentative collaboration emerging alongside ongoing emotional processing, while simultaneously, vigilance remained necessary, as old wounds and latent tensions could resurface unexpectedly, challenging the hard-won equilibrium and testing the resilience of new patterns of communication and trust. And yet, within this ongoing negotiation, the Frosts began to experience the emergent power of conscious, intentional engagement, recognizing that vulnerability, honesty, and the sustained willingness to confront difficult truths could yield lasting transformation, strengthen bonds, and cultivate a relational environment capable of withstanding future stressors. And as the first light of a new day began to filter into the household, the family, though still navigating complex emotional terrain, carried with them a cautious sense of optimism, awareness, and commitment, understanding that the work of rebuilding trust, restoring connection, and fostering empathy was continuous, demanding vigilance, courage, and deliberate practice, yet offering the promise of a more resilient, conscious, and deeply connected familial structure, one forged through confrontation, accountability, and the persistent pursuit of understanding, love, and mutual respect, leaving the Frosts poised on the precipice of a new chapter, defined not by past secrets and conflicts but by the intentional cultivation of honesty, emotional intelligence, and relational cohesion, a chapter in which the lessons of exposure, the labor of reconciliation, and the influence of Yandy and Mendeecees' interventions would continue to guide choices, behavior, and emotional engagement. shaping the family's trajectory in ways that ensured the enduring potential for growth, healing, and the reinforcement of bonds that, though tested, had proven capable of adaptation, repair, and transformation in the wake of extraordinary emotional trials, leaving the household both forever altered and infinitely more aware, intentional, and capable of navigating the complexities, vulnerabilities, and profound responsibilities inherent in the relationships that bound them together as a family. And there you have it, the shocking unraveling of secrets, confessions, and emotional confrontations that have forever changed the Frost family dynamic. Fans are still reeling from the intensity of every revelation, every tear, every heated exchange, and the lingering questions remain. Can the family fully rebuild trust? Will old grievances continue to resurface? How will Yandy and Mendeecees' interventions shape the path forward? Now it's your turn to weigh in. Do you think the Frosts will survive this emotional storm? Or are these cracks too deep to mend? Comment below with your thoughts, theories, and reactions. Let's get the conversation started. Don't forget to hit that like button if you were stunned by the drama. And subscribe to stay updated on every twist, betrayal, and explosive moment as this story continues to unfold. Your opinion matters, and we want to hear it, so join the discussion, share your take, and be part of the journey as the Frost family navigates the chaos, the secrets, and the relentless pursuit of truth. Stay tuned, because with emotions running high, alliances shifting, and secrets still lurking beneath the surface, the next revelation could hit at any moment, and you'll want to be here for every shocking, jaw-dropping, and heart-wrenching development.